Welcome, system agnostic classes too. Caveat is, you should listen to it. This all is foreplay in secondary worlds, historical context, more like schmistorical context. I have word for things, but you can have different word for also thing. No one system is mechanics, all is only in mind. Look, I'm really sorry, I've done these caveats so many times, and it's really rude of me, let's be honest, to do them in this completely incomprehensible way, because there are gonna be people for whom this is the very first episode of System Agnostic Classes that they see, but look, I always need to come up with a new way of saying them, and I am growing tired of doing so. Today we are talking about dark wizards who dark pact with dark entities of darkness in the darkest of days. So I think D&D has really just massively influenced how we think about warlocks in the modern role-playing context. And I don't actually have a problem with that, because I think the D&D interpretation of the warlock is kind of cool. Just the word sort of never made sense to me, because warlock sounds like a battle mage, a warcaster. Turns out it's actually from ancient Norse and means oathbreaker, which is interesting because not only is the warlock very often juxtaposed with the classic paladin, but also, I mean, they kind of literally owe their soul to a powerful entity of some kind. This isn't some showing your devotion type thing that you have with that entity. It's not the kind of relationship where you swear your blade to it and it gives you blessings. This is straight up, I am going to give you a small shard of my power, an infinitesimal amount of my actual might, and you're gonna become a force to be reckoned with. In exchange, you will be my bitch, and you will do my bidding, whether you like it or not. This creates a very interesting situation in the sense that many of the people who ultimately become warlocks will often not at all have the same skill sets as classic spellcaster characters, because they didn't learn their magic. And I think that this is something that should be represented in how warlocks work. In other words, I think that the Warlock is just one of those classes that can be infinitely diverse in the way that it is expressed, and it gets an additional layer of diversity and complexity if you add the skill set of the pre-Warlock life. A Warlock owned by a fire demon should be able to control fire, not whatever the fuck Eldritch is. A Warlock owned by a god of darkness should be able to play with shadows, not whatever the fuck Eldritch is. A warlock owned by some sort of entity from the deepest chasms of the sea should be able to breathe down there and manipulate water, not whatever the fuck Eldritch is. As you might have noticed, I have a little bit of a problem with the whole Eldritch thing. I think that unless your patron is literally a patron of Eldritch, whatever the fuck that is, you should not be able to blast, bang, or bust it. Because you have so much to play with, right? A mercenary given powers by a death god will be a very different character than a medic given powers by that same death god. They will use the powers they have differently, or maybe they will be granted completely different powers by their patron, because the patron, of course, is going to look at this tool that they're going to be using to enact their will upon the world and equip it in the kind of ways that it can do the things that the patron wants it to do. You really want to look at your patron and what they represent, what powers they have, and your character, what abilities they have, what role they play in the world, and really like pull all the supernatural magical elements at the intersection of those two things. Now, of course, warlocks have a very, very fundamental design problem when it comes to role-playing, and that is agency. The demonic entity that gave you your powers wants you to act on the behalf of that demonic entity, and they can make you. And even if they're not necessarily outright evil, whatever that means, bigger mystery than what Eldritch is, their code of ethics and the way that they think will probably be so utterly alien that it will be perceived as evil by the overwhelming majority of people. Maybe even your character. The character doesn't do what the patron wants them to do, the GM gets to punish them in a big way, if not outright take over their character to do things that the player does not want them to do. And if really the punishment for not doing a thing that the demon wants you to do is that it takes away all your cool powers and or maybe even kills you, I mean, is that a choice at all? Especially if your Warlock character is the only evil character in the party, that might lead to like the bad kind of conflict that actually hinders productive play. Although, to be fair, you know, you could also go the other way around sometimes with the patron and say, hey, I'm your demon. I just wanted to let you know, like, there's paladins and shit, and they don't like murder hobos like you, so how about you cool it a little bit? Otherwise, I'm going to punish you before you draw attention to my shit. Now, if the player playing the Warlock understands that their agency will be somewhat limited compared to that of other players, and if you have a good rapport with that player, it can be a fantastic class to explore. But the way I see Warlocks portrayed most of the time is like they're spellcasters who just have evil powers and like goth aesthetics, and ultimately the patron doesn't really give a shit. If this is how you want to play a Warlock, maybe consider playing something else, because you're kind of not playing into the fundamental character conflict of this specific class. And it's not like there's a shortage of other classes to pick from. Now, Hexers primarily differ from Warlocks in that they are free agents. They also pact with demons and powerful supernatural entities, though in my mind they tend to be like less powerful and closer to the real world than like the big boys that the Warlock has business with. Ironically, I see them as more of the like traditional historical Warlock, right? They're wizards, dark wizards who are familiar with many magics but have strayed from the path of righteousness and specialized in demonology and curses for all the wrong reasons. They're the ones who live in isolated dark towers, very much like witches in a way. They know a lot about these demonic entities on like an academic level, and they are powerful enough on their own to be considered like useful by those entities, although they always make sure never to enter a contract that is too unfavorable to them. Which actually might be interesting, to have a Hexer who got like fucked over and accidentally did enter a permanent contract with maybe even a minor demon and is now a Warlock of that demon and like fundamentally resentful of it. Because being a Hexer is of course a very dangerous profession to follow in your life, because you basically are a middleman for demons. You play the same games of like contracts and cunning and raw power, except you're a mortal. This is why I like to give Hexers maybe often like an additional edge over just regular people, in addition to them being, you know, like dark wizards with knowledge about all the dark lore and all that. Maybe they have a little bit of fairy blood in their veins, maybe some demon blood, some angel blood, some kind of blood that isn't just human. A Dhampir Hexer, someone who has like a parent that's a vampire, that might be a very interesting thing to do. They need to be very good with contracts and clauses. They need to always be on their feet, always be aware of when demons are going to try to fuck them over. They would have to be masters at summoning, binding, and exorcising demons of all kinds, just to be able to be seen as some sort of force to be reckoned with by those demons. Something that's more of an aesthetic consideration to me, but that I really like about Hexers, is that I picture them as not using the kind of flashy spellcasting magic that is visually impressive as like other wizards, sorcerers, and all those classes might. Like, they don't cast fireballs or create glowing orbs of light, have, you know, these like shiny hands that shoot lightning or whatever. They do hexes, they do curses, which though powerful are visually rather unimpressive. A withering curse cast upon an enemy where basically they touch you and you grow older or withered in some other capacity, maybe it's pestilent or something. That might be the most like in your face thing that they have in their arsenal. Hexes and curses are all about rules, they're all about metaphor and representation. A hexer might snap a dry twig that they had in their pocket because they carry around magical implements, and boom, suddenly your leg is also snapped. They create the sort of like definitive fate rulings that are curses. Like, you enter this house, and in 3 days all of your belongings will burn. And then you do it, and 3 days later all of your belongings just catch on fire and burn. And there is nothing you can do about it unless you find some other way to break the curse. Hexers are supposed to be extremely powerful and dangerous people, but without all the lightning storms. Their magic is supposed to be subtle, right? Like, a wizard might make this ritual and then like a portal appears with crackling edges, this massive shining beacon of we are going to some different plane or whatever the fuck. And the Hexer might just take like a paintbrush and paint a certain sigil on a door that is just there, and then, you know, opens the door, and the door for one time leads to this specific alternate dimension. Or maybe they will just, you know, do a little ritual and then lead you around a corner between two trees that arch in a natural way, and then suddenly you find yourself there. This subtlety is important because while wizards are of course celebrated as these magicers, hexes are kind of like pursued by Templars and Paladins to be, you know, sort of like have their heads cut off, if you catch my drift. But frankly, if you like your hexes to be just as like flashy as wizards with like a darker color palette, you do you. Necromancers are different than the other two because though they are of course often portrayed as demon pactors, I'm pretty sure that's mostly prejudice. These are sorcerers, wizards, mages who have specialized in the magic of death. Death being kind of a big deal to people, both culturally and, you know, psychologically. They're bound to maybe offend some person or other, by which I mean all of them in some capacity. And then you get painted as evil, whether you actually are or not. Ironically though, have you ever considered this? Even though the thing is that they are the masters of death magic, their most iconic abilities revolve around giving false life to dead things. Which makes sense narratively, of course. Just having a spell that makes you be dead is boring as shit, J.K. Rowling. And also, you know, it's cool to have hordes of like skeletons with axes and zombies and mummies and what have you. In my mind, necromancers eventually just reach this sort of dual state where they are both, you know, have one foot in the world of the dead, one foot in the world of the living during the process of their transformation into a lich, which of course they will eventually do. That's the end game stuff. So they can simultaneously perceive and interact with the real world and the world of the dead and the spirits. This makes it not just easy to like pluck specters out of thin air because you can see where they are. You don't have to, you know, wager an educated guess, but you can also like see the strings by which you can animate corpses that are lying around. Now, of course, you know, they can do all those things as well as less experienced necromancers, but with this double sight, you know this video, I've never been able to find it again, maybe I dreamt it, but basically it's a video of like a plumber, and he has this augmented reality it was probably like a proof of concept, augmented reality thing, where he could actually see through the walls into the pipes, well, they were like superimposed digitally. That's basically the equivalent of that, but for necromancy. It makes your job a lot easier, and it allows you to like sweat the small stuff a little bit sometimes. You don't have to pay as much attention to it. You have a more intuitive feel for how it works, and then also you can focus on like the bigger projects, which of course, sweating the small stuff will probably lead to some kind of accident eventually. And there is of course this like slow and steady separation from the world as its culture, because necromancers of course live in pretty much total isolation, surrounded only by the dead, who keep like terrible company at the best of times. A type of necromancer that I feel is somewhat underrepresented, in the sense that I'd like to see more of it, is the Stitcher. Now of course the Stitcher can very easily be combined with like the wizard with the dark robes, with the particularly gnarly staff, and what dentists refer to as English teeth. But there's just something about like the Victorian butcher doctor who wears like this black leather apron that's so bloodstains that even though it is a black leather apron, you can see the bloodstains. The Stitcher's approach is less like the value package, summon 15 zombies at once and watch them go. They're not particularly competent at anything, but they are 15 bodies moving. They really focus more on the, you know, we're gonna stitch together different kinds of corpse parts and other things, and then we're gonna have a super zombie that's a pain in the ass to deal with. And even though it doesn't really make much sense, I like to combine that with like, you know, flesh melding and mutating a little bit, even though of course it is dead. It's just cool, okay? And of course they will add some sort of mechanical element like blades or maces or spikes or more blades. But with the whole necromancer thing, it doesn't really matter how sophisticated your zombies really are, because there is a point where you have enough of them and you have like very basic, not even necessarily decision-making ability, but you know how you can create logic gates in Minecraft that are based on the behavior of villagers, how they like go out during the day, go in during the night. You could do that with zombies as a necromancer. And frankly, especially if some component of you is a stitcher with maybe mutation and melding abilities, you don't even need to go that route. You can just make these machines made of dead flesh with like organic and like artificial components and make these very sophisticated zombies that can take, you know, Minecraft with mods basically. So no wonder that like necromancers live always in the middle of nowhere, deep isolation, then occasionally send their armies of the undead to raid villages of the living for more corpses. They're kind of playing Factorio out there, which would be a very, very interesting plot where it's a necromancer, you know, basically halfway down the path of becoming a lich. The head is more skull than face, really, at this point already, and he abducts this mechanical engineer to show him how to design these flesh machines, because of course he studied magic his entire life and really wants to brush up on his engineering skills. This is why I think that all liches should be autistic. That would be extremely funny to me. If you know me, you saw this coming because you noticed that I didn't make an effort to highlight the good boy sides of all these classes. And of course, you know, the concept of evil is relative at the best of days. There are some fucked up societies in the real world, and there have been even more fucked up societies in the world of fiction. So how can we reinterpret these classes in a way that basically makes them, you know, acceptable and even seen as a force of good in the respected cultures and societies that they occupy? See, for Warlocks, for instance, I know that some people get mad at, like, not having demon patrons, and I personally actually really like the kind of patrons that are unusual, like liches, like
vampires,
maybe dragons. But people get really angry that you can have, like, angels and shit as your patron, which I actually think is really fucking cool. And it isn't the same as a paladin, just to make that clear, because the character conflict is a different kind of conflict. The character has a much more direct relationship with their deity. They must follow their will or else. Basically, paladins are still independent actors who make their own, like, moral decisions. The oaths that they follow are crafted in a way that is understandable to human beings in terms of ethics. Meanwhile, warlocks, getting direct instructions from their patrons, sort of operate more on like a divine ethics type level, which even if you have good deities, like say, oh, we have the archangel of bringing justice to evildoers, right? And the patron appears to you in a dream and goes, you must go to the village of Terrenheim to slay the mighty warlord Somar the Terrible, one of the worst people to ever exist in all of time. And you go to Terrenheim, and Somar the Terrible is a 7-year-old boy who's getting bullied in the town square because he hasn't become Somar the Terrible yet. That's a bit of an interesting moral quandary, isn't it? For Hexers, the good guy aspects are actually pretty obvious, I think. I mean, think about it. They're basically demon and curse contract lawyers that do exorcisms. In a pragmatically oriented, maybe rehabilitative society, they would basically be lawyers for people who deal with demons. They might draw up the contracts for if your business needs like some kind of demon assistance to do the business thing. It's a completely pragmatic thing. Or if you want to go the more moral route, they help the kinds of people that when they were in a very desperate spot, because let's be honest, you don't do a demon deal when you're in a good place in life. you know, they help them get out of that, they help them work around that, because of course, if you discriminate against people who went into demon deals, probably you're going to be discriminating against people who are the most vulnerable members of society, who did these things out of the sheer desperation of having no fucking options. If you want to turn that around a little bit, the Hexer might work as an attorney for maybe the rich kid, because they only work for the rich people, because the rich kid made a poor decision, you know, I want 10 billion kilos of cocaine, and so now you have my soul. Meanwhile, the poor mother of 5 trying to get food to feed her kids did the same thing. She doesn't get the help of the Hexer attorney. Now, necromancers are almost a science fiction concept. You could have a medieval fantasy post-scarcity society where all of the labor is essentially automated by corpses. I had this in a world-building project of mine where there's this city-state that was basically run by necromancers, and then the Empire showed up with the Imperial Empire religion that says necromancy bad, actually, and then they decided, okay, we're gonna get rid of all the necromancy, but we're instead gonna do bond slavery, because our entire society relies on free labor. But think about it, right? If you have a society like that, you get to have more specialists who can focus on, like, the higher concepts in life, like, you know, inventing stuff, doing culture, all those things. It doesn't even need to be like a dark and grimy necromancy society. It can just be, you know, a sort of what we might perceive as normal. Magic the Gathering does this really well in this the Amonkhet setting, which I'm realizing right now. I'm not sure if I can show it to you because I only have one hand and this book is somewhat heavy. Like, look at this, basically, right? It's the manual labor is being done by mummies, and it's not like dark and grimy, it's a very bright sort of Egyptian aesthetic. And having so many specialists as a society will of course drastically increase the speed at which your technology advances, which might make for a very powerful empire if the circumstances are right, which, you know, leads us to the old problem of you don't have enough corpses, is the people in your society, they just don't die fast enough. You extend their lifespans with necromancy, and when you begin to perceive your own people as so incredibly advanced over all of the other people in the world, it sort of becomes easy to justify genocide in order to, like, depopulate a whole area, make them all into a zombie labor force. You don't even have to send a lot of soldiers, you can just, like, send zombies. Talk about an evil empire. That is the ultimate evil, dark, necromantic empire. I really want to see this in play now. And if you want to add some nuance, you could make it so the people who actually live in the empire are not necessarily aware of the sheer horror that happens on its borders, because once again, you don't really need a lot of people to know. You can have a few, like, generals, specialists. You don't have, like, the rank and file soldier that's gonna come home and go, listen, they fucking kill people. Like, they just go out there for no reason and murder people to turn them into zombies. They might think they're the most ethical and morally righteous empire of all time. Damn, that is so fucked up. Anyway, thank you very much for watching the episode of Not Interesting Lives. This is a system-agnostic classes. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. And in that spirit, have fun with these classes. I'm suspecting that this is always what I say at the end of system-agnostic classes. It might not be. I genuinely don't know. And see you around, cunts.